Welcome to Workforce Talks, a podcast by the National Work Readiness Council. We tell stories to inspire career pathways across America. Follow along at NWRC.org. Now, here's your host, Reecie Stagnolia.
Good morning and welcome to the third edition of the National Work Readiness Council's podcast, Workforce Talks. I'm Reecie Stagnolia, Executive Director of the National Work Readiness Council. And in phase one of my career, I led Kentucky's adult education system, serving as the state director and the vice president for adult education at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. I was also fortunate to serve 2 terms as chairman of the National Association of State Directors of Adult Education. Before I introduce today's guest, let me talk a little bit about the National Work Readiness Council. The National Work Readiness Council is a national nonprofit workforce development, training, and advocacy organization formed in 2003 and officially incorporated in 2007 by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Our focus is defining the skills needed by workers across all industries to ensure that the workforce is equipped with the necessary knowledge and abilities to meet the demands of the ever-changing job market. The National Work Readiness Council seeks to identify skill gaps and partner with education and training providers to bridge those gaps. The initial vision was to identify entry-level foundation skills and that job seekers need to pursue career pathways. The council convened employers across industries, chambers of commerce, unions, educators, and workforce training professionals nationwide and built a common language and standards to define foundational career readiness. We have state-level partnerships in South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, New York, Florida, and Michigan, supported by our partner, Win Learning. We proudly endorse their credentials of value in academic skills, soft skills, and digital skills. Now, let me introduce today's guest, Dr. Ben Boggs. Appointed in February 2023, Dr. Boggs serves as the Commissioner of Missouri's Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. In 2019, Missouri integrated its traditional Department of Higher Education with the state's Office of Workforce Development, creating an innovative combined and blended model. Prior to his appointment, Ben served the Colorado Department of Higher Education as the Deputy Executive Director and Chief of Staff. Previous to his role in Colorado, he worked across many areas of higher education, including the National Conference of State Legislators, the Kentucky Educational Professional Standards Board, the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, and the Kentucky General Assembly. Ben earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Wake Forest University, a master's of education from the College of William and Mary, and his PhD in higher ed policy studies from the University of Virginia, and completed the Institute for Management and Leadership in Education at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. Ben, welcome, and it's super excited to have you as today's guest on Workforce Talks.
Thank you so much. It is a genuine pleasure to be with you and to have a time to chat together. Thank you.
Yeah. So Ben, I first thought I would do a little walk down memory lane for us from our days working together in Kentucky. So thinking back to 1993, Kentucky was the first state to elevate our adult education system to a department level agency, the Department for Adult Education and Literacy. And then in the mid-90s, Governor Paul Patton appointed our friend and mentor, Dr. Cheryl King, as the department's commissioner, and he also appointed an adult education task force made up of 6 members of the Senate of our legislature and 6 members of the House, along with 6 public stakeholders to study adult education and the public policy challenges faced by that. We partnered with an agency out of Colorado, in fact, the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, And the lead consultant on that is a person that you and I know well, Dr. Ames McGinnis, to study and develop a long piece of legislation that ultimately became Senate Bill 1, the most important piece of legislation in the 2000 legislative session in Kentucky. And at that time, the public policy challenge that we faced was nearly 21% of Kentucky's working age population, 18 to 64, lacked a high school diploma. So leading to that landmark piece of legislation that brought $12 million new dollars to Kentucky's adult education system, which at that time more than doubled our state funding. But moreover, it connected us with the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education to develop a long-term strategy. And as you and I remember it back then, the Adult Education Action Plan. And then to sort of tie a bow around that, in 2003, Governor Patton transitioned the Department for Adult Education fully to the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education by executive order. This move was really to ensure that we had continuity of leadership. So as we all know, in the public policy arena, a lot of times the gubernatorial changes, there are a lot of staff changes. So this was to ensure continuity of leadership there. And again, this was a first in the nation move to connect adult education to higher education. And as you remember, another person that we worked with that was the president of the council at the time, Dr. Gordon Davies, led that effort. And then our adult education system moved over to the Council on Post-Secondary Education, and we began our work together. So I'll let you talk a little bit about our memory lane together.
Well, thank you very much. And Reecie, thank you for this invitation. It really is great to have a moment to catch up with you, to talk some things through. And it's a pleasure to serve with NWRC. The one thing I would say, what you just gave the great overview. Some great policy decisions were made. The governor and the Senate particularly made this a priority. They put resources behind it. But for us to get the work done, it really did come down to, I was just a rookie staffer in these days. But we really came down to forming some relationships and getting an opportunity to get some stuff done. And we had some great leadership around us. Shell King, as you mentioned, Commissioner of Adult Ed at the time. And then Gordon Davies, as you mentioned, was the president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, which is where I was starting as a junior staffer. And I'm sure you and I've told this story before. He stuck his head in my office, which, again, I'm a junior staffer for the president of our department. To stick his head in my office was unusual. And he said, "What do you know about workforce and adult education?" And as you mentioned in my background, it was all higher ed. And I'm like, I don't know squat about what workforce and adult education. And he said, "You're perfect." Well, he said, "You're perfect. We're going to send you over to adult ed. You're going to work for Cheryl King." And he said, if it doesn't make sense to you, then any lay reader is not going to understand what they're reading. So just go over there and be a good guy. And okay. So there we go. But one thing I will say is when I did come over to the tower at the time, that was my first time over there. You, Cheryl, were so welcoming. And immediately, we had an opportunity to get some fun stuff done. You could have seen me as some sort of an interloper and who is this guy? But you and your colleagues welcomed me, and you in particular. And all of a sudden I knew this is pretty fun, and let's get some things done. I think also then I was opening up my eyes to the connection between post-secondary education and workforce. How do we help invest in the workforce in a way that lifts communities up, lifts people up in their work and their families? And then there really is a direct connection here. And so for me, it was a great start of a journey in terms of broadening my own views, but also then how do we tell the stories that we need to tell together? And back to your point, I think honestly, because our work relationships across the traditional higher ed workforce guys as we were and our colleagues at the time, the idea of rolling Cheryl and her operation on over to join the department was an easy decision because we already knew each other, and this was great. We were having a good time, and we were having a good time being successful. So I think that worked out really well. And of course, for those who are watching and don't know this, Reecie has been for a number of decades a key part of Kentucky's success in adult education. And the thing that was, we all knew that and relied on you. We could trust you. We knew there'd be good things to do. That you would always be a good partner, and it was fun to get things done. So, thank you for letting me tell that story. Those were good days.
Yeah, so we're today we're honored to, as you mentioned, to have you as a board member of the National Work Readiness Council, and you bring a unique perspective from your background, even going back to those adult education days, but now leading Missouri's higher education system. And one of the things I think back in sort of connecting all this work together with adult education, post-secondary education, workforce development, is a key phrase in that task force report back in the Senate Bill 1 of 2000 that talked about adult illiteracy as a fundamental barrier to every major challenge facing Kentucky, including early childhood education, education reform, economic development, and improving the health and well-being of Kentucky's families and communities. And really, adult education transcends a lot of different public policy issues like that, and can certainly impact that. And so, you've moved into a similar model in Missouri with higher education and workforce development. And talk a little bit about sort of your model there in Missouri.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy to do that. The what you cited there in Kentucky is true across many, if not all states. The data might shift a little bit here and there, but the fundamental principles are the same. And those basic skills are important, particularly in this day and age. And so, really what we're dealing with in Missouri is we're focusing on the fact that we are in a time of economic, technological, and demographic change. And all three are hitting at once. And so how do we as a state prepare and maneuver through these days? Our department was created in 2019. The governor at the time, Governor Mike Carson, had a task force to take a look at what were some of the workforce and economic needs in the state. And at the time, our Office of Workforce Development was with the Department of Economic Development. That was seen as probably a little cumbersome and not exactly connected, and that it would make better sense to take a look at, because of the post-high school training needs and education needs, to why not try a department where it's higher education and workforce development. So we were the first in the nation to be formally restructured as we are. There now will be, I think Colorado has enacted an executive order that's starting the process, and I think they're having governor's elections, and they'll make their formal adjustments shortly. But to be fair, every state has some sort of a Department of Higher Education. At this point, everybody has something of a vice president for workforce. You can't avoid it anymore. It's just, you're going to need to be focused on where we are. And of course, the work of the community colleges and their direct workforce engagement, that's true nationally. So the idea is, how do you put things together and make better resources? But what I would say, if I may, here about Missouri, we know from Georgetown University Center of Education and the Workforce, 65% of all jobs in Missouri require something past high school diploma. It can be a credential, it can be an associate degree, bachelor's degree, whatever. But 65% of all jobs require something past the high school diploma. Of that 65%, 30% is the bachelor's degree and up. So that means 35% is between the high school diploma and a bachelor's degree. So a lot of what we try to do is we're focused on how do we get organized better so that we are able to pick up those Missourians. So our mission as a department is to put Missourians on pathways to learn, work, and prosper. So we focus on the idea of pathways. So we want the earlier the better. So if we partner up with our friends in the Department of K-12, how do we do more dual credit? Can we start working with apprenticeships, internships? What can we be doing to start early to get young people focused on don't stop at the high school diploma? And then, you pick it up to where we are with the choices that young adults have coming out of high school. But as I mentioned with the demographic changes, we also want to talk about the workforce as it is. So where do we help uh, Missourians reskill, upskill throughout the course of their career? They call it career-long learning. How do you set it up so that now that's just normal? I mean, we could spend time, maybe we will, talking about AI. All of us now are trying to figure out where that fits. So I'll stop there so I'm not just rambling on and on. But I think you get the idea. At this point, it's all one big thing. But we're trying to help position Missouri for the future, but we need to also be taking care of the present. And so we're trying to do a little bit of both. Part of our department was the future, part of our department is really focused on the present.
Well, interesting is you describe your model there. I think about, also with workforce development, your connection with the job centers and the fact that so many folks who lack a high school diploma are educationally and economically disadvantaged and probably, walk through the door of a job center trying to figure out what's next in my life. And, I sometimes frame it as sort of the ABC. I'm looking for a job, a better job, a career. And then they come to those job centers and that connectivity with in your model. Talk a little bit about how you work together there on your sort of that pathways to credentials model.
I like that very much, and I like your ABC. I like that structure very much. So the way that we're structured then is with the Office of Workforce Development, like most every state, we've got the State Workforce Development Board, but here in this combined department, we're guided by our coordinating board for higher education, like many departments of higher education are. They'll have a council or a commission of some kind. That's the overarching authorizing board. But every state also has a state workforce development board. Our department then has both. I'm hired by the coordinating board, but the state workforce board does meet as part of our work. And of course, the director of our Office of Workforce Development, who reports to my position, carries that. But that allows us to have these kind of conversations and to better blend in terms of where are we and how the programs work. But to your point, it also means that in Missouri, we have 21 job centers. And over the last few years, we've got about 6 of them now located on community college, or one university has taken one on it. So we've got them on 6 campuses. And this almost throws back to the things you and I used to talk about in Kentucky. We would put adult learning, so some of those county contracts would switch over and go to the local community college. The idea is, how do we make it easier for folks who are coming into a job center? We want them to feel welcomed and don't want them to be intimidated. Of course, we're trying to provide good services. But while we're having these conversations, where are you in terms of your credential? As you say, how do we get you to a better job? So let's get you a job so you can pay next week's rent, get you out of whatever the situation is. Excuse. But then let's get you on a pathway so that you're not quite so vulnerable next time. And a lot of people come in, they've already got some sort of credit, some sort of credentialing, something that they've already kind of gotten started that we can help get them on a pathway. And then we can do that soft handoff to the community college or whatever college the situation is, to where, hey, while you're getting this training to get upskilled, reskilled, let's go ahead and get you taken into this other portion where you can start getting the credit you need. We'll get you that credential. So it's a way to get them into a pathway as seamlessly and more efficiently and in a comfortable way. So there's 21 job centers, and there's about 6 of them are now on campuses. But others have good partnerships with their local institutions, and it really does become a local. The success really is a local focus. We're not going to do all that sitting here in the state capitol, but we all know this who are in this world.
So, I reflect back oftentimes on early in my career, I visited a local adult education program in Eastern Kentucky that was housed at one of our Kentucky Community Technical College campuses. And it was full of students. So I talked with the instructor, and I said, oftentimes you visit adult ed programs and you don't see so many students in a class. And I said, what do you attribute your success to? And he said, my students tell their friends, I go to the community college, and they leave it at that. They don't say, I'm illiterate, I don't read, I'm going to a local adult ed program. They just say, I go to the community college proudly. And so that really laid the foundation for me to understand that these are adults who it builds their self-esteem by being able to be on that campus. And for years, we had said, no, they're fearful of being on a post-secondary campus. They won't go there. And it helped me understand that more likely they would not want to go back to a high school where they experienced failure, dropped out, maybe had conflict with a teacher or principal. But it was very self-esteem building for them to be on a post-secondary education campus.
Yeah. Again, you and I had these great conversations, and these were great early lessons that were just drilled into me back in our Kentucky days, a couple of decades back. For adult ed program to be at the local high school and offer night classes, you're asking this population to come back to the high school parking lot. And that may be just hard memories that they don't want to do. So how do we help change that game? And I play that plays in my head even now. So I was at a community college here out near St. Louis, and they happened to have an adult ed program on their campus, and it was packed. And I stopped and so here in Missouri, adult education formally is with our K-12 partners. But a good number of the programs are on community college campuses. And so we're finding ways to just meet up with the community college folks and talk these things through. How can we help? And how can we be a better partner with our K-12 department so that we're all on the same page trying to get to the same population? It doesn't matter who gets the credit. Who cares? We just need to get the numbers up and let's tell a good story together. But it comes down to that. I think, how do we help give people a sense of dignity and a sense of hope? They're trying to find a way to have a better life. And so what do we do to help support that? And to not, we don't want anybody to feel shamed or patronized. We want to welcome them for where they are and what they want to accomplish, and we help you do that. So I tell the folks at our job centers here, we don't know who's coming in the door. They might be ashamed. They might be angry. Life hasn't been fair, and they need help. And our job is to meet them where they are, pick them up, show some respect, and start working with their strength. What are we going to do? How can we help you? And so, it's good, noble work, but it's not easy work, and it can take a lot out of people. But it can certainly be rewarding.
Yeah. Well, you make me think about sort of the other piece of that is sort of our branding, is how we brand. And, I've come to understand that words and images matter. And, years ago, our programs were often branded learning centers. Well, that implies if I go there, maybe I'm unlearned, or even, and some even further back were literacy centers. So if I see my friend Ben walk into the literacy center, that means he's probably, if the shingle out front says literacy, probably illiterate. We tried to move away from some of those, and even the term adult basic education or adult foundational education, to me has negative connotation to it, because foundation or basic is at the bottom. And so how do we, brand that? And for a while in Kentucky, was able to brand that Kentucky Skills U, and to think about not only you as the person, but that you, if you came to understand that meant university, that was fine too. And some people proudly thought of it in those terms. So that's a interesting thing about branding that's really important to our students.
I think you're absolutely right. And again, I think I certainly had foundational experiences along with you, as you mentioned, in Appalachia. And, in Appalachia, community matters, and perception matters, and family matters, those kind of things. So yeah, the way you word things, the way you label things, what makes sense to us here in an administrative department, uh, how does that play in the local community? And where people are family and they know each other, and yeah, that human touch absolutely matters. I want to also talk about along these lines. One thing we've got going on that works really well in Missouri. I'm sure other states have this going as well. We also extend some of this into our with our the prison community. We know in Missouri, our incarcerated population, 97% of all incarcerated individuals at some point will be released back into their communities. And so, how do we prepare them and the communities for that? Because we want to be successful. The people that do this well, states that do this well, Ohio did this really well back in the 1990s when there was federal funds that did this type thing. Um, if you do it well, you have a better success rate for those going on to parole. The community and local economy does better, but the big deal for folks like us is the recidivism rate dropped significantly, and they were able to redirect part of that Department of Corrections budget into other activities. They didn't need as many facilities. They didn't need as many guards because the population was actually shrinking. So here in Missouri, we've got uh, an education reconnection program at at all 11 prisons here in Missouri. And as soon as one thing that guides us here, I will add, is in state statute, for an incarcerated individual to even be eligible for parole, they have to have at least earned the GED or their equivalent. And so they offer those courses in the prison system. Once you go through intake, whatever, if you don't have that, then you're automatically will be placed as part into that, and you have to complete that if you want to have a chance at parole. So we take advantage of that to say, okay, if you're doing this part, what else can we add to it? Can we get you a credential? Is there something? So we have different institutions offer prison education programming. The Department of Corrections itself offers apprenticeship. Would you believe it or not? You can have an apprenticeship in prison through some of the different trades that they have already. But we work in close partnership with the Department of Corrections. They work closely with us. But then, as an individual identified as getting on track for parole, and particularly if they're coming in and earning parole, um, we'll step in and start talking about where do they want to go next? How can we be prepared to help them be ready to be employed? And then our staff kind of takes over at a certain point at the prison. And then sometimes individuals choose not to go back to their original place of home for whatever reason. They want a fresh start. And so they'll be placed someplace else in the state for their parole. We'll do a soft handoff to the local job center. And at that point, an individual will have a parole officer, but they'll also have a contact at the job center to get them squared away and to get them employed. And the goal here is to, we want to be able to show in 9 months out they are fully employed, successful, and anchored in their community where they are. We've turned out to be very successful in this, I think my number somewhere in here, 17,000 Missourians coming through this program. They're going right into the workforce. So we're proud of that kind of work. But again, if you'd asked us 20 years ago, would the Department of Higher Education be doing this? It would never have crossed our minds. But now it feels pretty natural. What else can we be doing to build up the state's workforce so that we're positioned for success?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, building up the workforce, one of the things on the horizon that we see that I think is going to be of great beneficial impact is the workforce Pell, and how students will now be eligible for short-term training to be able to access Pell funds in pursuit of those industry recognized credentials that are in such demand today. And talk a little bit about maybe Workforce Pell and what you see there and its impact for our students.
Well, I appreciate that. I got to say, I've got some colleagues here at the Department of Higher Ed and Workforce Development who have been sprinting hard for the last 6 months for Missouri to stand up our Workforce Pell program. And in fact, just this week, the governor provided us with an official letter of approval so that we can proceed and go ahead and go public and launch. And so we're going to even actually meet this afternoon to talk about, okay, now we got to start pulling triggers. So that was Workforce Pell, been in conversation for a number of years. How do we take Pell grants that are traditional grants for students going into 4-year bachelor's programs on traditional university campuses? How do we create Workforce Pell for folks who want credentials that can lead to degrees, but really are focused on work skills, a lot of it CTE and things of that nature, but still want it to be stackable to give them career pathways going forward. This was a lot of written into the big beautiful bill and OB3 as they call it, and so there are federal guidelines, and it really leaned heavily on everything belonged to the governor, each state, but it needed to be in consultation with the state workforce development board, and it was meant to be practical in short term. And so these programs, so Missouri had an advantage because our department would be administering the program, but we already had the state workforce development board built in, so we could consult with them easily. We didn't have to go to another department and try to get on an agenda and talk about what this is about. We were all already here together. And the chair of the state workforce development board, we already speak regularly. So here's an opportunity. He was on board quick and like that. And then of course you work together with their staff and lay out what we're going to do. So in following the federal requirements, we looked at, 800 and some occupations. We also have a built-in data system, the Missouri Economic Research and Information Center, MERIC, as you call it. So we also had built-in data. So we had some advantages some other states may not have had in terms of efficiency. But we looked at 800 and some occupations. They have to be high demand, but also high need. They have to show a 70% employment rate, people who get a credential, 70%, not only 70% people have to finish the program, 70% then have to be employed in that field. So those are pretty high bars. That's at the federal level. So we started with 800 some occupations that we had registered across Missouri. In the end, we only came up with about 29 that really would be eligible to participate, meeting the checklist of things, high demand, high need, high paying, and then to meet the bars I've already mentioned. So, and then we connect those, of course, to academic programs through the various identification zip codes, what have you. So we laid all that out, and we did a lot of consulting. How do you come up with that? And a lot of that is as much art as science. So we looked at the data, but we also consulted with the regional workforce investment boards because we wanted to make sure we were going to include their regional needs. Like many states, there's not one statewide issue. Our economy operates in regions, just like many states do. So we want to make sure we were being sensitive to what's going on in the different regions and what their needs were. We looked at some existing programs, some of our financial aid programs that were workforce focused. We looked at Perkins data and categories. So we just wanted to make sure we were not going off on a tangent, but that everything was sort of the cohesive and existing policies that we had around us. And again, we were also with Department of Economic Development. We were with our department at K-12, just making sure, are we all aware of what we're doing and can they help us? So anyway, that's where we are. I think that in many states, my take on it right now is because this is a pretty high bar to get programs in, I think a lot of providers, community colleges and education training providers are probably going to take some time to see. I don't think we'll get swamped with a lot of applications on day one. But I do expect this time next year, when people have had time to take a look at how it works and how everything's structured, they'll be more ready to do this. You do have to be able to demonstrate a year of success in the way that you're structured as a program. So you can't just make up your program next week and then apply for this. You have to be able to demonstrate that you've been in business for a year in the way that we've asked you to be. So that's going to be complicated. So you get a sense of why 6 months of sprint, why this has not been easy to do. But I do think it's going to pay off. I mean, it's one of those things where it's a little slow getting off the ground, but once we all understand what this is about and how it works, I think it's going to make a real difference. I think it's going to open up pathways and resources to populations who often feel left behind. And I think it's also a way to incorporate regional strategic plans and economic and workforce development. That regionals will come up with ideas of what they need, and they'll work out those partnerships to get this done. So it's a good deal.
Well, that's certainly, that sounds like you've invested a lot of time, energy, and effort into a well thought out plan and strategy for the state of Missouri. And so that's something to look forward to on the horizon, that many states are doing what you're doing now to develop that model and plan how to move forward.
You know how this goes. We all learn from each other. You know, some states get a little ahead on something, and they'll offer, here's some lessons they're learning. And again, it comes back to, how do we help each other out? We're trying to help our states. So if that's working for your state, can I take a look? Because I'm trying to address the same issue in my state. And you know how it goes. Karma, what you give is what you get. So, but it is always helpful that we have these kind of councils and things that we can have, where we can draw from each other and learn from each other. These are good deals.
Well, certainly this has been a great conversation with you today, Ben. It's been a little bit of past, present, and future as listened to you and thought about. We've reflected on our past. We've talked a little bit about present, and then thinking about what the future holds for workforce development and adult education. So thank you for being our guest today on Workforce Talks, and appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you so much, my friend. And yes, haven't we been lucky? What span of work lives we have had. The world has changed around us, but the fundamental principles are still there. How do we help build people up? How do we help them get to build up their families and their communities? It's all good stuff. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You take care.
Thanks for listening to Workforce Talks. For more career inspiration, follow us on social media. Learn more about the National Work Readiness Council and view the show notes for this episode at nwrc.org.